The throne room of the alien empire was enormous, a cathedral of polished metals and glowing panels, stretching higher than any human building could reach. Light shimmered off the walls, reflecting colors that no human eye had names for, but that the aliens could see as easily as breathing. Today, the room was filled with nobles, officials, and dignitaries from across the galaxy. Their faces were sharp, their eyes cold, and their movements precise. Everything about them spoke of order, hierarchy, and power. At the center of this crowd stood the queen, her tall form draped in robes of silver and blue that seemed to float around her. Beside her, Princess Celira waited silently, her expression calm but her heart heavy. This was a gathering meant to secure alliances. Across the galaxy, noble families would come forward, offering promises of loyalty, wealth, or bloodlines strengthened through marriage. And yet, as the queen's advisors whispered behind her back, every noble house had found a reason to refuse her daughter. The reasons were all variations on the same theme. Celira was too gentle, too empathetic, too careful. In a society where strength and cunning were prized above all, these qualities were weaknesses. The queen's eyes scanned the crowd, each glance landing on faces that refused to meet hers, faces that wore polite smiles masking disdain. For decades, she had worked to build her daughter's reputation, to train her in arts, diplomacy, and knowledge. But in this empire, these talents were not enough. Every noble seemed to have decided that Celira was unfit to be a partner in their power, a threat to their lineage. The first noble stepped forward, his voice echoing through the massive room. "We thank the queen for this invitation," he said, bowing with perfect precision. "But we cannot accept Princess Celira's hand. She lacks the vigor and ambition required to strengthen our line. We must decline." Some nobles tried to mask their amusement. Others looked down, pretending to take notes on the floor. Each refusal was a knife in the queen's heart. Celira remained still, but her cheeks flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She had trained her whole life to represent her family with dignity, yet here she was, treated as if she were a child who had failed at the simplest test. Finally, the last noble stepped forward, a tall figure with eyes that glowed faintly blue, a mark of their high rank. "We must join the others in declining," they said calmly. "Princess Celira's qualities are admirable, but they do not meet the standards required for a union with our house. The empire needs strength above all else." She had tried to hold herself together to remind herself that her daughter's worth was not defined by others' approval. But the repeated refusals, the public humiliation, and the coldness in the eyes of her peers shattered that resolve. "No one wants my daughter," she cried, her voice trembling as it echoed through the throne room. "Do you not see her heart, her mind? Does it mean nothing?" She wanted to speak to defend herself, but the room's atmosphere pressed down on her, making it impossible. Among the observers was a human envoy standing at the edge of the crowd. Humans were rare in this empire, and most aliens considered them insignificant, short-lived, fragile, and politically unimportant. The human watched everything quietly with no trace of fear or judgment. He had studied alien behavior for years, learning their politics, their customs, and their codes of honor. He understood why the queen's words carried such weight and why the nobles' refusals would sting so deeply. But unlike the aliens, he felt no pressure to conform to their expectations. Slowly, he stepped forward. The movement drew a few startled glances. No human had ever entered the throne room without an official introduction, and certainly no human had ever approached the queen in this manner. Yet he did not bow excessively, nor did he speak with flattery. His voice was steady, clear, and surprisingly calm. "Your Majesty," he said, "I would like to offer myself." Some covered their mouths to hide laughter. The queen's eyes widened, unsure whether this was an insult or a misunderstanding. You, she asked, her voice shaky. "You are a human, you are not even considered part of our empire, why would you?" "These are qualities your empire overlooks, but they matter to me. I do not offer this out of pity or politics, I offer it out of respect and choice." Here was a being that did not rely on any of these things, yet the room could not ignore him. Princess Celira looked at him, and for the first time in the day, a spark of hope ignited within her. She had felt invisible, judged solely by standards that did not value her strengths. And now someone saw her, not for her ability to fight or dominate, but for her mind and her heart. The human continued, addressing the room with calm conviction. "Your empire values strength and dominance," he said. "But strength is more than force. Strength is endurance, compassion, and the ability to face challenges without harming others unnecessarily. I do not seek to change your empire." I seek only to stand beside her, as an equal, as someone who will respect her choices. Could her daughter's future, her empire's reputation, and her own dignity withstand such a challenge? Celira stepped forward slightly, her eyes locked on the human. She saw no arrogance, no desire for gain, only sincerity. The faintest smile appeared on her lips, a quiet acknowledgement of the courage it took to speak in this room, to stand against centuries of expectation. Your courage is unusual, the queen said finally, regaining some composure. But our laws are strict. Any outsider who seeks to join the royal line must be tested, must prove their worth according to our customs. I do not seek to impress with strength, only to prove that choice, loyalty, and compassion can matter as much as power. Some were skeptical, convinced that a human could never survive the trials. Others wondered if perhaps, for the first time, they were witnessing a shift in the understanding of strength. The Empire had long celebrated conquest and dominance, yet here was a human showing that there could be other forms of power, forms that relied not on fear, but on endurance, understanding, and unwavering commitment. The queen drew in a deep breath. She had spent a lifetime protecting her daughter, preparing her for a world that valued strength over kindness. And now, faced with an outsider willing to challenge centuries of tradition, she felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. The path ahead would be difficult, and many would doubt, resist, or mock them. Yet, for the first time that day, the future seemed open. Princess Celira's heart lifted slightly. She had been overlooked, dismissed, and rejected, yet now a human, so different from anyone she had known, stood ready to face whatever the Empire demanded, not out of ambition, but out of choice. She realized with a quiet thrill that perhaps the world was about to change, not because the laws had shifted, but because someone had the courage to stand forward and redefine what mattered. The crowd waited, tense and uncertain, as the human took another step forward. He did not bow, he did not plead. He simply stood tall, calm, and steady, showing that sometimes true strength did not roar, it endured. The queen felt her chest tighten with a mix of anxiety and relief. The journey ahead would not be easy. The trials would test everything they believed. But for the first time, she dared to hope that her daughter might find someone who truly understood her, and that perhaps the Empire itself could learn a new measure of strength. As the sunlight streaming through the crystal windows danced across the room, casting a myriad of colors over the assembled nobles, Princess Celira took a deep breath. She would face the coming trials with courage for herself, for her mother, and for the human who had dared to step forward. And in that moment, the throne room felt less like a place of judgment, and more like a stage where the story of a new kind of strength was about to begin. The following morning, the throne room was quieter than usual. The nobles whispered among themselves, casting sharp glances at the human who had dared to step forward. Princess Celira walked beside her mother, her steps measured but confident. She could feel the tension in the room like a heavy fog, but she also felt something else, a spark of hope that she had not known in years. The queen, though still uncertain, had made a decision. If this human truly wished to stand beside her daughter, he would be given a chance. The Empire had strict customs for outsiders seeking royal union. Trials were designed to test endurance, intelligence, and loyalty. Few aliens had ever failed, but they were all creatures of instinct, strength, and cunning. Humans, the court assumed, would crumble under the pressure. "Bring him forward," the queen commanded. The human stepped through the archway with calm, measured steps. The nobles watched closely, expecting fear, weakness, or hesitation. They were disappointed, or rather unsettled, when they saw none. He did not bow excessively, he did not try to impress. He simply stood before the queen, his eyes steady and his posture firm. "Your first trial will test your ability to survive in a hostile environment," the queen said. "You will be placed on the desert planet of Varaxis. The surface is harsh, the sun burns stronger than any you have experienced, and the creatures there are both swift and dangerous. Few alien warriors have returned intact. If you succeed, we will consider the next trial." "I understand. I accept the trial." His voice carried a calm confidence that unsettled some of the nobles. To them, confidence without arrogance was almost alien. The next day, the human was transported to Varaxis. From orbit, the planet looked barren, a vast expanse of red sands stretching endlessly. The air was thin, and the sun scorched without mercy. As he stepped onto the surface, he took a deep breath and let himself feel the heat and dryness, rather than resist it. Every muscle in his body prepared for the challenge. The creatures of Varaxis were unlike anything humans had seen before. They were tall, angular, with limbs that bent in multiple directions, eyes that glowed faintly in the sun, and jaws that opened wider than any human mouth could. Their first attack came quickly, a pack moving with precision to flank him. Many aliens would have charged, weapons raised, seeking to overpower the creatures. The human, however, studied them carefully. He noticed patterns in their movement, the rhythm in the way they hunted. He did not run and he did not fight blindly. Instead, he used his surroundings. He ducked behind jagged rock formations, forced the creatures into narrow passages where their speed was less effective, and moved quietly, conserving energy. Hours passed, and the sun rose higher, scorching his skin. He used his water rations sparingly, knowing that he could find small reserves in the cracked stone beds of the desert. Every step required patience, observation, and quick thinking. Meanwhile, back on the Empire's capital, the nobles observed through live feed. Their amusement had long since turned into skepticism, then shock. The human did not panic, did not falter, and did not complain. Each movement was calculated, intelligent, and calm. Some whispered among themselves, debating whether this fragile species might actually survive. Princess Celira watched in awe. She knew many of her people would have fallen immediately, relying solely on strength to overpower the creatures. But the human's approach was different. He respected the environment, respected the creatures' movements, and found ways to survive without harming more than necessary. She felt pride not just in him, but in the quiet realization that he might succeed where the strongest aliens could fail. On the second day, the temperature rose even higher. The sand shifted like liquid under his feet, and the creatures grew bolder, circling him from all sides. The human had no weapons designed for this world. He carried only a small pack of supplies and a basic tool for digging. As exhaustion began to set in, he remembered something he had learned from watching human survival stories. Energy must be preserved, risks must be measured, and hope must remain unwavering. A sudden storm arose, wind whipping the sand into blinding curtains. The creatures vanished for a time, hiding from the storm as he did. He found shelter under a small rock overhang and wrapped himself in a light cloth to protect against the heat and sand. He could feel his skin burning, his throat dry, but he did not panic. He focused on small victories, keeping his body cool, finding tiny water sources, and staying alert. By the third day, the creatures had returned in even greater numbers. They had learned his movements and tried to corner him. One lunged from behind a rock, jaws snapping, but the human was ready. He used a technique that surprised even himself. He created a diversion by throwing sand to mislead the creature, then slipped through a narrow gap to safety. He moved with agility, but more importantly, with patience and intelligence. This was not a battle of brute strength, but of mind and adaptability. Back on the observation platform, the nobles were growing uneasy. Whispers filled the room. "He cannot last much longer. He is only a human. But look, he survives." Even the queen found herself holding her breath, her hand trembling slightly as she watched the feed. For the first time, she felt a flicker of doubt about the rigid standards her empire had always followed. Could strength truly be measured only in force and aggression? By the fourth day, the human faced his greatest challenge yet. A sand pit, deep and wide, stretched before him with a raging storm above it. The creatures seemed to be waiting, intelligent and calculating. Many aliens would have tried to leap across or force their way through, but the human paused. He observed the wind, the patterns of the creatures, and the shifting sands. He noticed a narrow ledge running along the edge, partially hidden. With careful steps, he navigated the ledge, avoiding both the storm's fury and the predator's attacks. As he reached the other side, a creature lunged unexpectedly. He dodged and with quick thinking trapped it temporarily under a small rock formation, ensuring it could not harm him without killing it. He did not rejoice or boast. He simply continued forward. Each action was precise, deliberate, and controlled. His mind never wavered, even as his body ached and thirst gnawed at him. By the fifth day, the human emerged from the desert planet, battered but alive. The nobles gasped. Few had expected him to survive even one day, let alone 5. Some muttered curses, unable to reconcile their beliefs about humans with the reality before them. Princess Celira's eyes glistened with admiration. She had seen courage before and strength in many forms, but what she had witnessed was something rare: endurance combined with wisdom, patience, and moral resolve. The queen stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You have survived the trial of Varaxis," she said. "Few have done so, even among our most elite warriors. Your actions have shown not brute force, but intelligence, observation, and loyalty. This is unexpected and yet undeniable." Even the most skeptical nobles could not deny the evidence. Their traditions valued dominance, aggression, and the ability to destroy obstacles. And yet here was a human achieving what few aliens could without relying on raw power. The whispers grew into murmurings of uncertainty. What was strength, if not adaptability, patience, and understanding? Could their long-held beliefs be incomplete? Princess Celira approached him quietly. "You have done more than survive," she said softly. "You have shown courage, cleverness, and a heart that this empire has long forgotten to value. I am proud to stand beside you. I will face whatever comes next with the same determination." The empire had its rules, its customs, and its beliefs, but the human had proven that there were paths to success that did not rely solely on aggression or dominance. The nobles, still recovering from the shock, began to reconsider. Some would never accept it, clinging to their old ways. Others would watch closely, curious to see what might come next. The empire itself seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. The human had not only survived the first trial, but he had also shaken the very foundations of what it meant to be strong. Princess Celira felt hope blossoming within her. For the first time in her life, she felt that she was not defined by her weaknesses. Perhaps someone truly understood that her intelligence, kindness, and patience were not flaws but strengths. And perhaps, together with this human, they could show the empire a new way to measure worth. As the sun set over the capital city, casting long shadows across the gleaming towers, the queen called for the next steps of the trials. The human would face them with determination, patience, and insight. The nobles would watch, the empire would observe, and the princess would stand by him, learning that strength came in many forms, and that humanity, in its own way, was capable of greatness beyond measure. The human returned to the capital, weary from the desert trial, yet his mind remained sharp, his spirit unbroken. The nobles had gathered again, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and silent frustration. They could not deny that he had survived the Varaxis trial, yet many whispered that his methods were unworthy of true strength. Aliens of their kind measured power by dominance and force, and a human surviving by patience and intelligence defied all their expectations. Princess Celira met him at the gates of the palace. She noticed that despite the harsh environment he had endured, his posture was steady, and his eyes held the same calm determination she had seen before. "You have returned," she said softly. I do not know if I have ever admired anyone as much as I admire you now." "It was only a matter of patience and careful observation," he said. "Strength is not always about overwhelming others. Sometimes it is about understanding your environment and adapting to it." She knew the human had survived what many of her elite warriors could not, but she also knew that the Empire would not easily accept him. "Your next trial will test not only survival, but judgment and moral resolve," she announced. "You will be placed on the moon of Orvath, where alliances and decisions will determine the fate of an entire settlement. How you act and what you choose to protect will be judged carefully by our laws. Failure here may mean death." The settlement was under threat from a group of hostile aliens who sought to claim it for themselves. The defenders were poorly organized and terrified. Most of them were inexperienced, untrained, and ill-equipped to fight. Many would have abandoned their posts, leaving the colony to fall. Others might have tried to strike aggressively, hoping brute force would save them. The human, however, did not panic. He quickly assessed the situation, noting the weaknesses in the settlement's defenses, the fears of its people, and the movements of the hostile aliens. Rather than issuing commands or attempting to intimidate, he began to act as a coordinator, quietly instructing small groups on where to position themselves, how to conserve their resources, and how to protect the most vulnerable. His approach was methodical, based on observation, reason, and an understanding of human psychology. Princess Celira had accompanied him to Orvath, though she remained in the background, observing his decisions with careful attention. She was amazed at how naturally he could inspire trust and cooperation without force or fear. Where most aliens relied on dominance to lead, he relied on communication, empathy, and logic. Slowly, the people of Orvath began to follow his guidance, moving with precision, protecting each other, and working as a single unit rather than as scattered individuals. The hostile aliens, expecting chaos and weakness, were caught off guard. Their attacks were disorganized as the defenders moved in ways they did not anticipate. The human had not fought them directly. Instead, he had orchestrated a defense so efficient that the enemy struggled to find openings. He anticipated their movements, set traps using the natural terrain, and positioned the colony's defenders to take advantage of every opportunity. By the third day, the tide had shifted. The hostile force was trapped in a valley, unable to advance or retreat, while the defenders moved with confidence and precision. The human had not wielded weapons recklessly or sought personal glory. He had empowered others to act, to trust themselves, and to survive. Even the most skeptical aliens in the observation teams admitted silently that the humans' methods were extraordinary. In the capital, the nobles watched through live feed. Some were aghast, some skeptical, and some quietly impressed. They whispered among themselves, questioning what they had been taught about power and leadership. Could it be that strength was not merely the ability to destroy others, but the ability to inspire, protect, and endure? Could the Empire have misunderstood what truly mattered? Princess Celira approached the human as the battle reached its climax. "You have done more than survive," she said softly. "You have saved lives without even raising a weapon against them. You have shown that wisdom and patience can triumph where force might fail." They listened because they trusted, not because I commanded. Strength comes from cooperation, understanding, and the willingness to act when others cannot. I only guided them. The Empire had always valued dominance, but here was evidence that survival, loyalty, and moral courage mattered as much, if not more. When the enemy finally retreated, the human and Princess Celira addressed the colony. The people, exhausted but alive, looked at him with gratitude and respect. Many had never encountered a human before, yet they recognized the value of his leadership. They had survived not because of weapons or raw power, but because of intelligence, coordination, and moral courage. The human's reputation began to spread throughout the empire. The nobles could no longer ignore him. Even those who were stubborn in their beliefs had to acknowledge that he had passed not one, but two of the most demanding trials, surviving where many of their elite warriors would have perished. The concept of strength was shifting quietly, imperceptibly in the minds of those who watched. Princess Celira and the human returned to the capital. The queen received them with a mixture of relief and admiration. "You have exceeded all expectations," she said. "Few beings, alien or human, could have survived Varaxis, and fewer still could have led a settlement under attack with such skill and care. You have proven that there is more to strength than power alone." "I have only done what I could to survive and to protect. I did not seek recognition or glory. I only acted according to what I believed was right." Perhaps the empire had been too narrow in its definition of worth. Perhaps survival, wisdom, empathy, and moral courage were as important as strength and cunning. The nobles continued to whisper, some in denial, some in admiration. The human had changed their perception, even if they would not admit it openly. He had passed 2 trials without relying on brute force, without demonstrating dominance, yet achieving results no alien could have predicted. His success challenged every assumption they had ever held about humans and strength itself. Princess Celira walked beside him quietly, feeling a newfound sense of partnership. She realized that the trials were not only testing him, but also testing her people's understanding of what it meant to lead and survive. Together, they had begun to show that strength could take many forms, and that even a species considered fragile by the Empire could teach powerful lessons. The Queen looked at them both and spoke slowly, deliberately. "The next trial will be the greatest yet. It will test not only survival and judgment, but your ability to influence the Empire itself. The outcome will affect the entire realm, and many will watch closely to see if a human can truly match the expectations of alien society. I do not seek to dominate, only to endure and to guide where I can." The human had survived Varaxis. He had led a settlement on Orvath, and he had done so without seeking glory or demonstrating brute force. Some began to wonder if perhaps the Empire's understanding of strength was incomplete, if the very values they had relied upon for centuries might need reevaluation. For the first time, the Empire glimpsed the possibility that humanity had something to teach them, not weapons, not dominance, not political cunning, but endurance, empathy, intelligence, and moral courage. The trials had begun to reveal the truth. Humans were capable of remarkable strength, not in the way the Empire had expected, but in ways that could change the galaxy itself. Princess Celira looked around the capital city as the sun rose the next morning. The streets were alive with activity, the nobles murmuring, and the people going about their daily lives. She felt hope in her chest, a hope that had been absent for so long. Perhaps the Empire was ready to learn that strength was more than power, that true value was not measured by dominance alone. And perhaps with this human beside her, they could show the world a new definition of greatness, one built on patience, wisdom, loyalty, and courage. The human stood beside her, calm and steady as always. He did not boast, he did not demand attention, yet the impact of his actions resonated through the empire. The trials were far from over, but the first seeds of change had already taken root. For the first time, Princess Celira felt certain that, together, they could face anything, and that the empire would never see humans the same way again. The human had returned from Orvath to the capital, but there was no time to rest. News arrived that a powerful alien coalition, long thought to be neutral, had launched an unexpected assault on the Empire's outer territories. Entire colonies were under siege, and the Empire's elite forces struggled to respond quickly enough. The nobles in the throne room panicked, shouting orders, blaming each other, and arguing over strategy. The queen watched, her expression tense, as the empire she had helped build teetered on the brink of disaster. Princess Celira stood beside her mother, her mind racing. She knew that this assault was different from any trial or challenge her human companion had faced before. This was not an isolated environment like Varaxis or a single settlement like Orvath. This was the fate of entire colonies, thousands of lives, and the reputation of the empire itself. Every moment mattered, and hesitation could mean catastrophic loss. The human walked calmly into the command center, observing the chaos. The nobles were shocked to see him here, among them, offering no bow or request for permission. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he scanned the information boards, studied the movements of the enemy, and quietly noted the positions of friendly forces. The room seemed to hold its breath, unsure whether this human could contribute meaningfully or would simply be overwhelmed by the scale of the conflict. After a long pause, he spoke. "The Empire is facing two critical problems," he said. "First, your forces are spread too thin, which allows the enemy to attack multiple colonies simultaneously. Second, the current strategy relies too heavily on direct confrontation, which will result in unnecessary losses. I suggest we consolidate forces strategically, protect the most vulnerable colonies first, and then use calculated counterattacks to push the enemy back." How dare a human, a species considered fragile and insignificant, offer guidance? "And you presume to know better than our generals," one of them snapped. "I do not presume," the human replied calmly. "I observe, I act according to logic and the value of life. Brute force is not always the answer. The goal is survival and efficiency, not glory." She had seen him survive impossible trials, lead a settlement under attack, and earn the loyalty of those who would have perished without his guidance. Perhaps, in this crisis, his insight could make the difference between victory and disaster. She nodded subtly, granting him the authority to coordinate a portion of the Empire's response. Princess Celira followed him closely. "We can do this," she said softly. "Your strategy will work if the commanders listen. I will help you." He suggested rotations for tired troops, routes for supply lines, and methods to evacuate civilians safely. His strategy was unconventional, emphasizing cooperation and adaptability over brute strength. Slowly, the commanders began to trust him, seeing results almost immediately. The first colony under siege was a mining settlement on a rocky planet. Enemy ships bombarded the surface, while ground forces attempted to overrun the defenses. Many would have panicked under such pressure, but the humans' guidance allowed the defenders to conserve their energy, set up defensive positions intelligently, and protect civilians. Small teams worked in perfect coordination, moving quickly from one critical point to another. The enemy, expecting chaos, was confused by the precision and resilience of the defenders. As the hours passed, reports came in that the tide was turning. Colonies that had seemed doomed were now holding firm. Civilians were evacuated efficiently, casualties minimized, and enemy forces were trapped in positions where they could not advance or retreat easily. The human had not fought directly. He had not wielded weapons in the traditional sense. Yet his influence changed the outcome of battles that would have been lost under conventional leadership. The nobles watched in disbelief. Some whispered that perhaps humans were stronger than they had believed, but many remained stubborn, clinging to their traditions of dominance and aggression. The queen, however, felt a growing sense of pride and relief. Her daughter had chosen a human not for his physical strength, but for his mind, his courage, and his ability to act wisely under pressure. And now, that choice was saving lives on a massive scale. On the fifth day of the conflict, the human faced a critical challenge. Enemy forces had coordinated a simultaneous strike on three key colonies, aiming to split the Empire's defenses and force a collapse. The human quickly assessed the situation. He proposed a bold plan. Rather than attempting to defend all three colonies equally, he would concentrate forces on the two most strategically important locations, leaving the third lightly defended but prepared to slow the enemy's advance. By focusing resources efficiently, he could ensure survival and then counterattack decisively. The Queen hesitated. This was a risk the Empire had rarely accepted. To leave a colony vulnerable, even temporarily, seemed reckless, but she trusted him. "Do what you must," she said. The human moved quickly, coordinating troop movements across vast distances. He issued clear instructions to commanders, ensuring that communication was maintained despite interference from the enemy. His calm demeanor inspired confidence in the troops. Where panic might have spread, discipline took hold. Where confusion might have caused chaos, efficiency and strategy prevailed. Princess Celira worked alongside him, assisting in communication and morale. She saw how naturally he inspired loyalty, not through fear, not through domination, but through clear reasoning, empathy, and courage. Soldiers began to follow his instructions without question, trusting that his strategy would protect them and save lives. The next hours were tense. Enemy forces tested the defenses repeatedly, probing for weaknesses. In one instance, a heavily armed alien battalion attempted to breach a critical supply line. The human had anticipated the move. He had positioned a small team in advance, using the terrain to create choke points and slow the attackers. The result was a perfectly executed ambush that allowed the defenders to repel the enemy without unnecessary casualties. By nightfall, the humans' plan was proving successful. The two key colonies held firm, and the lightly defended settlement had managed to survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Enemy forces were trapped, overextended, and demoralized. For the first time, it seemed possible that the Empire could turn a disastrous situation into a victory. In the capital, the nobles were forced to admit that the humans' unconventional approach had worked. Some did so grudgingly, unwilling to acknowledge that a human could outthink their most elite warriors. Others began to see the potential for a new kind of leadership, one that did not rely solely on strength and dominance. The Queen, watching from the throne room, felt a mixture of pride, relief, and quiet astonishment. Princess Celira approached the human as the immediate crisis began to subside. "You have done more than anyone expected," she said. "You have saved lives, protected the Empire, and shown that humans are capable of greatness in ways our people have not understood. I am honored to stand beside you." Strength is not always the ability to destroy. Sometimes it is the ability to survive, to protect, and to act wisely when others cannot. Your actions have not only saved lives, but they have also changed how this empire views strength, leadership, and loyalty. This is a remarkable achievement, and it cannot be ignored. His intelligence, patience, and moral courage had accomplished what centuries of tradition had failed to teach the empire. For the first time, the old ways seemed incomplete, and the possibility of change hung in the air. Princess Celira took the human's hand. "Together, we can continue to show the Empire that strength comes in many forms," she said. "You have already changed perceptions, but there is more work ahead. The Empire must learn to value what is just, what is wise, and what is enduring, not only what is strong. We will prove that humanity has something important to offer, not by conquering, but by enduring, protecting, and leading with integrity." The human had not only survived trials and led under pressure, but he had demonstrated that the values she had long tried to teach her daughter, loyalty, courage, intelligence, and compassion, could be powerful forces in themselves. As the sun rose over the empire, the outer colonies secured, and the enemy forces retreating, the capital felt a shift. The nobles, though not all willing to admit it, had begun to reconsider their definitions of strength and leadership. The human had shown that courage, wisdom, and moral fortitude could rival, and even surpass, brute force. Princess Celira looked out over the city from the palace balcony. She felt pride, not only in the human beside her, but also in the possibility that her people might finally recognize the value of qualities they had long overlooked. Together, they had faced a crisis that could have destroyed the empire, and together they had prevailed, not through dominance, but through intelligence, strategy, and compassion. The human stood beside her, calm and steady as always, his presence a quiet reassurance. He did not boast, he did not demand recognition, yet his actions spoke louder than any words. For the first time in centuries, the Empire had witnessed a new kind of strength, one that would forever change how humans and aliens viewed each other, and perhaps how the Empire itself understood power. Princess Celira smiled at him, a quiet confidence growing in her chest. She knew the trials were not over, and that challenges would continue, but she also knew that together they could face anything. The human had proven that true strength was not only physical but also mental, moral, and enduring. And in that moment, she felt certain that the Empire would never view humanity the same way again. The aftermath of the battle left the Empire shaken, yet alive. Colonies that had been on the brink of destruction now stood firm, their defenders exhausted but triumphant. The Queen looked out from her throne, her mind racing with the enormity of what had just occurred. For centuries, she had believed that strength and dominance defined the Empire. Now she saw proof that there were other forms of power, forms that humans possessed naturally, forms that had saved countless lives in ways her people had never considered. Princess Celira stood beside her mother, the human at her side. She had watched him quietly orchestrate victories, guide soldiers, and protect the vulnerable. She had seen him face impossible trials and act with patience, intelligence, and courage. Now, in the calm that followed the storm, she realized that the Empire itself had changed because of him. The values he represented, resilience, wisdom, empathy, had spread like an invisible force through every corner of the realm. The nobles gathered in the throne room, their expressions mixed. Some were impressed, some reluctant, and some openly hostile. They could not ignore the human's role in the Empire's survival. They had observed his actions, measured the results, and seen that where raw strength and aggression had failed, strategy, patience, and moral courage had succeeded. A murmur ran through the crowd. Humans were no longer insignificant. The Queen cleared her throat, calling for silence. "You have all witnessed the trials, the battles, and the results," she said. "For too long we have measured strength by force alone. Today we have seen another kind of strength, one that comes from intelligence, patience, and the courage to do what is right, even when others doubt you. This human, this outsider, has demonstrated what we have failed to recognize, that true power lies not only in domination, but in endurance, wisdom, and moral resolve." The colonies had survived, the enemy had retreated, and the Empire had endured because of his guidance. Some could not yet accept it fully, but they could not deny the results. Princess Celira stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "For too long, our society has valued aggression over thought, dominance over compassion. The human beside me has shown that survival and victory can be achieved without unnecessary destruction. We can learn from this. We must learn from this. I do not claim superiority. I only act according to what is necessary, what is right. Strength is not only measured by power, but by endurance, understanding, and the ability to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The Empire has now seen that humans possess these qualities, and they can achieve remarkable things when given the opportunity." Yet now she realized that her daughter's values, intelligence, empathy, and patience were just as powerful as the traits that had long defined the Empire. She could see a future where these qualities would not only survive but thrive. The nobles began to speak, some hesitantly, others cautiously. "Perhaps," one said, "we have been too rigid in our definitions of strength." Another nodded. "If survival and success can be achieved without dominance, then perhaps our understanding is incomplete." Small discussions spread through the throne room, and though not all agreed, a shift had begun. The human had not only passed trials and saved colonies, but he had also sparked a reconsideration of the Empire's values. Princess Celira smiled at him quietly. "You have changed everything," she said softly. "Not through force, not through fear, but through your courage and your wisdom. You have shown the Empire a new way to see humanity and a new way to see strength. Together, we have shown that cooperation, understanding, and courage can overcome even the greatest challenges." Colonists told stories of how the human had guided them through the battle, and these tales spread throughout the Empire, inspiring others to consider new ways of thinking. The Queen held a private audience with her daughter and the human. "You have proven yourself," she said, "not only in the trials and in battle, but in how you have influenced the hearts and minds of our people. My daughter has chosen well, and I see that together you represent a new vision for our empire. It is the willingness of your people, the courage of your daughter, and the openness of your empire that made this possible. Together, we have accomplished something greater than any one individual could achieve. Colonies sent representatives, soldiers and civilians alike, to honor the courage and wisdom that had saved their homes. The Queen spoke openly about the lessons learned, emphasizing that strength was multifaceted and that true power included endurance, intelligence, and moral courage. Princess Sailira stood beside the human, holding his hand as they faced the assembly. She spoke with confidence, her voice carrying across the room. We have seen that victory can be achieved without unnecessary force. We have learned that strength is not measured solely by dominance, but by wisdom, patience, and courage. Together, humans and aliens can create a stronger, wiser, and more enduring empire. The empire had changed because of him, and there was no turning back. In the quiet moments after the ceremony, Princess Sailira looked up at the human. "You have done more than survive trials or lead battles," she said. "You have changed the empire itself. It is shared, built through understanding, endurance, and courage. This is a lesson for the empire and for the future. The empire will remember this day, and humanity will never be seen the same way again." She knew that challenges would continue, but now she had the confidence that together they could face anything. The humans stood silently, observing the city from the palace balcony. The sun rose over the empire, casting golden light over the towers and streets. It was a new day, a day that marked not only survival and victory, but transformation. The empire had begun to see that humans were capable of greatness, not through force, but through endurance, intelligence, and moral courage. Princess Sailira leaned on his shoulder, feeling the weight of the moment and the promise of the future. "This is only the beginning," she said. "We have much to do, many lessons to teach, and many challenges to face." "Yes," he said quietly, "but we have shown the way. Strength is not only power. Strength is wisdom, patience, and courage. That is what will endure." The human had arrived as an outsider, overlooked and underestimated. Yet he had become a symbol of a new era, one where strength could be measured by understanding, endurance, and moral courage. And as the empire began to embrace these new values, a quiet transformation took hold. Aliens who had once valued aggression above all else began to respect patience and intelligence. Soldiers trained not only in combat but in strategy and cooperation. Leaders learned to listen, to adapt, and to value life alongside victory. Humanity, once considered weak and insignificant, had left an indelible mark on the galaxy. Princess Sailira looked at the human one last time that evening, a sense of peace and certainty in her heart. "You have changed everything," she said softly. He smiled faintly, as calm and steady as ever. "We have changed everything together," he replied. "The empire will remember that strength comes in many forms, and humanity has proven it can endure, lead, and inspire." A new era had begun, one where humans were no longer underestimated, where strength was not only measured by force, and where courage, wisdom, and empathy could reshape an entire civilization. The trials were over, but the legacy had only just begun.